Hey guys, welcome back to From the Depths. Child Builder here. So, in the last video, I promised to showcase a few more of my combat ships. So this is one of my oldest airships, but also one of the most recently retrofitted ones. So we can start the tour here in the bridge, go back, and then we'll look at the combat roles, do some combat testing, and then we can have a look at the technical details of the craft as well. So here's a bridge. I make all my ships with the goal of making them fully walkable. Fully walkable being the operative term. Some of the spaces are quite small, so that's the airlock. Here back, there's a crew area which I recently renovated for most of the service life of this airship. There has been no decorative elements in the back, but recently I was happy enough with the ship to consider it finally finished, even though it's been serving in combat since for about 600 hours or more of playtime. So here, um, here's a bunk. There's a tiny kitchenette, a resting area. There's a control panel, and this is a very interesting device, which we will come back to. So yeah, just a very minimal amount of interior space, but it's still workable. Craft that's only less than 10k volume and 200k resources. Ah, jeez. So here we come outside. You can see the thing in its entirety. So this is a laser airship, one of my earliest ships. When I was still starting out learning about lasers. I was inspired by those laser broadside airships in animes, those cheap airships or spaceships that usually get blown up quite easily. But I think that's fitting because this is a quite low price range airship, so it's not meant to be super strong or tanky. So yeah, against larger ships, it does indeed have quite a bit of chance to get blown up, but hopefully it won't happen. So here's the rest of my destroyer fleet, um, and I will explain. So they're all in the 200k range, and I will explain the reason for the recent retrofits. So initially, this craft is meant to be a laser broadsider, um, a somewhat offensive craft that treasures up the laser for a long time and then fire a short burst to try to punch through as many layers of material and do some critical damage as possible. However, recently I have built some newer craft that can do this even better, especially this sniper destroyer. What's it called? The Dusk Herald destroyer. I think I'll just leave it at that for now. I have this hover tank as well, the Whirlwind Waltz, and then first the Dancing Starlight. Um, and in the Quest for Neater campaign, I had actually been embarrassed um, by one of the easier Great Talent crafts that use a nuclear device, the Perseus, which is quite a cheap craft with a low difficulty rating, but it managed to land the nuke on my hover tank, which is a huge source of consternation and embarrassment, um, especially for such a small craft. Getting nuked isn't very healthy. When I decided to retrofit the burst fire um, offensive craft to what it is now, which is a defensive fleet escort, which the name shows the role, the escort destroyer. All Alright, so now you can see this craft, whereas it's the older version of the Dancing Starlight, in its intended role of basically being a price match counter to the Lightning Hood's Megawatt laser gunship. So you can see instead of firing its laser continuously, it will charge up for a long time and then fire, burst. If I close in here, see the effect of the laser is that it just punches straight through the ship and do massive amount of damage to its internals. You can see its laser power is massively cut, just due to internal damage of the laser going all the way through. Just cutting all the way through the ship. Yeah, it's very nice and satisfying. And that time I had probably about 400 hours of playtime in the game, and that was my skill level, and I was quite satisfied with building something with similar cost to the Megawatt, but doing better. But however, after using such a ship in the campaign, repeatedly in various roles, I realized a lot of the Lightning Hood's design suffer from being too compact and also lack of smoke. So a laser ship that can do this kind of damage to Lightning Hood vehicle is not really um, all that effective into late game when considering all possible uh, roles that it might operate in. Can be completely ineffective in an offensive role um, against certain types of enemies. So I started rethinking about how I can retrofit this craft. Interesting. So here you can see what the laser is doing. It's got about 140 AP, which I saw at the time it was quite a lot because you only need um, about 70 AP to do full damage to heavy armor, but really smoke reduces the AP a lot. So to do damage, significant amount of damage to metal, not just heavy armor through smoke, you probably require over 200 AP. Um, yeah, to have a craft that's probably functional in most combat scenarios. Here you can see the laser output regulator is causing the pauses to charge up a bit before firing. Also, why it's not doing more is a good question. I think it's slightly affected by game changes since I built it. Alright, so here's the newest version. Actually not just with the retrofits, I discover a lot of design issues and flaws. Quite dumb ones, in fact, like engine's been blocked, engine exhaust been blocked in the older version. So quite extensive retrofit. Even changed the engine type. So one of the first things you can see is instead of using a 2Q laser, it uses a 0Q laser now. Let's have a beautiful. So let's have a look at the AP. The AP now currently is over 200, which it can do quite significant damage to metal and alloy even through smoke, and acceptable amount for what role this fills, which is now escort, uh, even to heavy armor through smoke. Not a huge amount, but it can, is not nothing. So one of the main weaknesses of 0Q laser is that if fired continuously, each micropulse will be very weak, and if the power of the pulse is not concentrated, then it will spread the damage out all over. But having a charge up and firing a burst, you try to concentrate the damage a bit more and not weaken the burst potential. It's still not a pinpoint amount of damage, but it is kind of a acceptable compromise if you fire multiple. So this ship doesn't have smoke or heavy armor, which is not the ideal target for a laser with excessive amount of AP, but it's still very well melting through the ship. And then it's got a decent amount of range and speed for defense, almost 2,000 meters. It's got a small amount of interceptors for missile defense, and then it's reliant on speed and lambs, and another secret weapon or defense mechanism for hull protection. One of the latest changes as well is shield arcs. So basically, it will only power up shield to full level on a side that's facing the enemy, so or the primary target, and it will always face the largest unit on that side. But also because it circles so far, so ideally, even with multiple targets, all of the threats will be on one side of the craft only. Yeah, you can see it's almost fully disabled, this albacore. You cannot turn to face it anymore. So with that, we'll go on to a more difficult and interesting combat test. So here is one of the Great Palace cheapest nuke craft, the Perseus, which is a nuclear bomber. Oh, jeez, that front section is diabolical. Very well done. So yeah, as you see, even though the laser charges up for a while and fires at its primary target, the ship will prioritize small. Let me just put this on goggle so you can see it again before it dies. It will prioritize the smallest target first, due to the role of being an escort, and when it detects a nuke, it will actually interrupt its primary offensive firing cycle to target the smaller threat and destroy that. And that will actually interrupt the offensive firing cycle of, say, charging up for 10 seconds and firing for 2. And in fact, when it fires at the smaller threat, it will not hold fire to charge. It will just dump whatever laser energy it has at that target until it is destroyed. And how this is achieved is actually very interesting. The craft doesn't use a laser regulator to regulate laser, if you can believe that. Yeah, it's very interesting innovation in laser fire control. Where did that even go? Oh, yeah. So because these Great Highland nukes are so crazy, they have very unpredictable flight patterns due to their just PID control and how they're built. it's interesting that because they're not built well, they don't maintain a very like smooth and predictable flight pattern. They're actually very hard to hit. Even with laser, it's not 100% accuracy, so you want to be firing the laser as continuously as possible without stopping to get the best chance for intercepting it. Even though it's not firing at the main ship all the time, it is still doing quite considerable amount of damage over time, and eventually it will be able to kill it. Keeping in mind this Perseus is considerably more expensive than the Dancing Starlight. Also got a lot of metal, and I think that's smoke, although it's kind of hard to tell, so it will take a while for it to laser through it. Yeah, okay, it's got another gun, so hopefully nuke intercepted. This is very satisfying to watch. I was highly embarrassed in the campaign when one of my hover tanks just was not able to shoot down the nuke, just because it couldn't turn his turret fast enough to track it and got nuked. Very, very expensive repair bill, unfortunately. In fact, this Perseus even got away. Not very happy with it. Yeah, nuke all you want, you're not gonna land that hit. Alright, it's 0 damage. At this extreme range, it does have a bit of issue detecting the nuke, and that's why it switches fire between the two targets. I do want the ship to retain a bit of offensive potential, that's why it has the burst fire, offensive fire mode still. Even though that's not its primary intended role anymore. Okay, so I was wrong. The Megawatt is not a medium target. It is actually considered hard, even though it doesn't use smoke. So take it how you will. But even now with this firing mode, it can still do quite a bit of damage to the Megawatt. Let's have a look where you can already see a bit of lasers exposed. So we're taking a bit more damage than before, just due to not shutting down of its weapon system immediately, but it's landing most hits in a tight grouping, so it is able to shoot through. So now we have significant loss in laser firepower. Pretty satisfying to watch.
Okay, now this is more armor damage, unfortunately.
Well, Okay, so we have killed it. Okay, so finally I will showcase its use against a much more expensive and godly level of enemy. So it's not really expected to win, but here we'll show what it does. So basically these lasers will, in addition to its normal defenses, it will, ooh, ouch. Oh, okay. So yeah, it's equipped with two axes warp drives, or rather three axes. Oh, come on, are you gonna... So it's got multiple layers of muscle defenses, and it will only fire its primary laser against large missiles. So it can't intercept everything from this Manticore, which is, a 300k dedicated missile craft. But yeah, so we're kind of mitigating almost 100% of the Manticore's damage, and we're putting in a tiny amount of damage. So we're not really expected to win, but again, this is a fleet support craft, so uh, ideally it can attract missiles to the fleet and neutralize them. So this type of semi-offensive laser is not the best for shooting down missiles, but um, in situations where you really don't want the missiles to hit and to damage, they can work in its secondary, tertiary role. Oh yeah, not dodging that. Um, yeah, so the warp drives only activate against large to huge missiles. So that prevents them from being activated by pre activation swarm with small missiles that, and then when the large missiles arrive, you will not be able to dodge. Let's see if you can do it. Yes. Yeah, so almost absolute defense. Not quite though. Yeah, so hopefully you found this interesting. Um, if you stay tuned, we can go inside and have a look at how this is done. So this is pretty simple. This is the breadboard fire control. So um, there's three different ACBs that use channels K, O, and L, which is universal across my whole fleet for this kind of purpose. A small target will have so if the primary target is small, whatever volume is considered small for a given craft, then the output of K will be 1. Otherwise, it could be medium, O being 1, or L, uh, large target L being 1. When L is equal to 1, this attack pattern will be used, which goes through a multiplier. When this output is 1, then it will be A, otherwise it will be B, and then A controls another ACB that turns on the local weapon controller for the main lasers, or B, um, which turns it off. Is one or the other, I forgot, but that's how I have it set up. And then there's a timer, so timer is 10 seconds, so it will charge for 7 seconds and then fire for 3, um, because 3 is the switch point. It's probably a function that can do it more elegantly, but this I'm used to just using if and multiplier statements for everything, so that's why I know and that's why I work with. If it's a medium target, it's got a shorter charge cycle of 1.3 and 4. Otherwise, if the target is super tiny and it doesn't matter how much damage you do, as long as you do some damage, it will explode. Then the laser will not charge, it will just fire constantly until it's destroyed. This is a warp controller, so yeah, basically the warp controls goes to warp forward, warp down, and warp up. And again, there's different detectors around the ship. Um, so if it detects a missile close to the top of the ship first, it will just trigger up. Otherwise, it will trigger down, and then finally, if the missile is near the rear of the craft, just due to it having such a high forward speed, the ship itself, of course, then it will trigger the forward warp. A few other things I did retrofit was this used to be a 3x3. I forgot what lens um, injector fuel engine, but actually some of exhausts have been blocked, which is very embarrassing. But now it's been replaced by a 3x7 by however long steam engine, which is quite compact. It is not the most dense or efficient engine, but it's a good compromise between those two factors, plus the factor of having a rectangular form factor that's easy to put into a craft and be incorporated. This is this is actually the universal steam engine which I install in all my craft, because it has a very round number of 20k engine power, which you know like whatever power need you have multiply or divide by 20, and that's how many sets of these engines you want to put in. Embarrassingly, because this is one of my older crafts, it does use fire repair bots and stuff too for the normal rules I use of a 200k craft using just two repair bots, uh, which is what I'm using on my latest destroyers. So this is an interesting device you saw earlier. This is what allows it to activate its warp drive against large missiles only and not um, small or medium missiles. So this is called a missile identifier, which I um, got the design from the Singularity. So here you can see a CWIS controller. It filters what size of missile it targets. Bin 1000 bin large, as you can see here, and 2000 bin huge. Um, is there a range limit? It will only target when the missile is within 200 meters. It will activate. When it activates is this turret, which will aim the laser at this ACB, and if the ACB takes damage, it will trigger channel H, which tells the ship that there's a missile of the appropriate size within range. And then if it also triggers the missile warning ACBs placed along the ship, then so basically if both the missile diameter trigger and the missile proximity trigger are triggered at the same time, then it will warp. How the zero damage laser is achieved is just using the laser regulator to make the laser output as low as possible. And then there's only a single pump here. Um, Accuracy for this is set to be 100, so just in case the missile is above this laser that can aim, it will still fire at the ACB. And here, make sure you set the failsafe to nothing, no failsafe, otherwise it won't fire. Yeah, so thank you to the builders of the Singularity for telling me about this. They use a more complicated system, but for me, this is efficient. And the missile proximity sensors are these. So if the missile is within 70 meters of this ACB, it will trigger the channel G. Um, which you want to make sure to place a couple of these um, along the whole length of the craft, and not just in the back or in the middle. Especially for something that doesn't have a spherical shape. Yeah, you kind of just want to make sure you're covering it uh, in this manner rather than needing a huge circular sphere of detection. Because then, if missiles that have a wide miss, you don't want that to be triggering the warp. Here we can see the warp is fairly rudimentary. It charges for 40 seconds and has a stabilization of 40 seconds. So basically, you don't want um, the charge time to be too high over or under the stabilization time, because no matter how fast you charge the warp drive, it will not be able to activate until it's fully stabilized. Um, I looked into adding more stabilizers, but you need an insane amount of stabilizers to have any significant impact on a decrease in stabilization time. So, um, the best way to have more warps and more chances to dodge the missiles is just to have more different axes. Um, so yeah, that's it. That's the craft, the Dancing Starlight, escort destroyer. Pretty good at escorting, if you ask me. Hopefully, it can serve a variety of combat roles as well. So yeah, I think that's all for today. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time on From the Depths. Have a great day.